It's just great to be here. It's really nice to teach in a building that was built in 1695 and has 30-inch thick walls. The classrooms that I'm in, Thomas Jefferson took classes in there. But the audiovisual really stinks. The projectors never work, and there are no rooms that are like this. It's just gorgeous with perfect acoustics and stuff. So it's really, really nice to be here. I've been studying humor now for about 30 years, and in that time, it's become a really respectable topic. I've done several presentations, for example, at medical schools, where people were studying the opposition between humor and stress. And I'm going to argue that the best stress relief is humor. People are also studying humor in business. I do lots of presentations, for example, to banks, and I've done 15 for IBM on how humor helps make the sale. Now, Professor Bookout tells me that some students here are into healthcare, some are in speech, some are in computers and business. I'm going to try to say something that's valuable to just about everybody. But my general message is going to be, your sense of humor is probably the most important gift you have as you go through life. One of the things that I studied to write my recent book was the evolution of humor. And on the cover here, I have this wonderful picture of these 3 laughing orangutans. It turns out that laughter starts in chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans, only they don't laugh on the out. They don't laugh ha, ha, ha. They laugh on the in-breath. So they laugh ha, ha, ha. So their laughter sounds like panting. Here's 3 laughing orangutans. Here's 3 people laughing too. This is in the building where I teach. This is Wren Hall. Here's the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth. She can't really open up and let go because she's the Queen of England. But here's the president of our school who just laughs like Friar Tuck. And here's the governor of Virginia, Tim Kaine. So humor is today very respectable, and politicians laugh. If you go back just 100 years ago, though, nobody in public life would make a virtue out of laughter. If you look at presidents like Lincoln through Taft, you don't see them laughing. In fact, 100 years ago, there were books like this one. Here's an illustration from a book called A Philosophy of Laughter and Smiling, where the author argues that laughter makes you ugly. In fact, his motto here is exhibiting distortions on the human face divine. And he says that if you laugh just a little bit, if you just show a little bit of teeth like this woman, that's okay. But when you really open up and let go like this guy, he says it makes you really ugly. And it's also medically dangerous. He cites several people who laughed themselves to death. They literally died laughing because it interferes with your heart rate and with your breathing. Now, luckily, this prejudice against laughter slowly died out in the 20th century, but it did survive in education. I think education, especially primary school, is one of the last places to really systematically suppress humor. I can still remember the first thing a teacher ever said to me. She said, "What's so funny, Mr. Morreall?" Remember that line in grade school? Well, I was so naive when I was 6 years old that I took it for a real question. So I said, "There's a huge cockroach in Dave's desk." She was not amused. In school, kids who are good at music go to the music room. Kids who are good at art go to the art room. But kids with a good sense of humor go to the principal's office, which is where I spent a good share of my time. Now, in the last few years, especially in American business, there's been a complete turnaround from the prejudice against humor to a valuing of humor. When I started doing presentations for companies, for example, corporations 20 years ago, no American bank used humor. Today, many American banks use humor. If you've ever watched the Capital One ads on TV, for example. So humor is now a respectable part of American business. And I'm going to talk about how it reduces stress, how it promotes communication and connection with other people, and also how it makes you think more creatively, think more flexibly. These are skills that are valuable not just in business, but they also have implications for healthcare, in anything where people are dealing with people. So I figure I'll go till about 12 o'clock, and then if anybody has to run to another class or something, that's fine. And then for the last 20 minutes, anything you want to tell me or you want to ask about, we can just open it up to discussion. I've mentioned business, and let me start with a real small business. My family and I were traveling through Maine a couple of summers ago, and we ran across a little sign by the side of the road. And the reverse psychology here was just too much. We had to go in and check. About 100 miles north of there, we were over the border into New Brunswick, Canada, And we ran across a plumbing truck, and we stopped and talked to this guy. This guy's got only 2 trucks, and he's got about 8 people who work for him total. He could have painted his truck any way he wanted, but this is how he chose to paint the plumbing truck. Now notice if that truck goes by and you see that, you're going to remember his plumbing truck, and you're going to remember the connection. If he had just painted his truck white or gray or black or something, you never would have remembered it. Even organizations like police forces. Here's Bakersfield, California. Here's how all the sheriff's cars in Bakersfield are painted. I don't know if you can read it, but it says, "We'll kick your ass and take your donuts too." So this kind of mock hostility is part of a lot of advertising today. Here's another example. When I was a kid, from the time I was, I think, 6 till the time I was 10, I saved up my money to get a BB gun, and my favorite BB gun was a Daisy air rifle. Here's a recent billboard that you may have seen. Okay. You can get a lot of humor out of making fun of yourself, out of taking some image that people have of you and playing with it. Here is a small restaurant in Tennessee where the local lore is that there's a lot of incest. Here's the restaurant. Okay. So humor, even when it's pointed against yourself, maybe especially when it's pointed against yourself, can get people to like you, can open them up and have them pay attention to your message. In American business, the more high-tech the company, the more likely they are to use humor. As I said, I've done 15 presentations for IBM, 12 of them at IBM's headquarters. And the computer business is just full of examples of how humor helps. Here's an article from the Washington Post about mind games for tech success. When you go for an interview at a lot of high-tech companies, one of the things that they ask you for is to think on the spot, just come up with ideas, to brainstorm. And they also look for a sense of humor. Here's a company called Excite at Home. This is in California. And here's how you get from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor. This orange plastic, here's an employee landing on the 1st floor. If you think about the evolution of the modern laptop computer, which everybody has. It's very interesting. In the early 1980s, when IBM came out with the laptop computer, they had a real serious image problem. When some of you weren't around in 1982, but when IBM came out with these small computers, their image was of huge computers. When people thought IBM in 1982, they thought of mainframes that took up a couple of rooms. So IBM had to have an image, a spokesperson, who didn't look like a towering giant. So what they chose for their spokesperson was Charlie Chaplin, because Charlie Chaplin was small, he was non-threatening, and of course he was funny. Another company from California that makes input-output devices for computers is called Adaptec. And in the mid-90s, they decided that their annual report to stockholders was going to take a different turn. So here's what they did in 1995 for their annual report to stockholders. They did it as kind of an adventure comic book. This got so much attention and was so well received by their stockholders that the following year they did this as their report to stockholders. A, B, C, and D, all about being connected to data. In this book, you get to meet Wally, who's trying to do things with his computers, but he doesn't have the Adaptec equipment, so he's screwing it up. And then Molly, who has Adaptec equipment, so she's much more successful. You also get to the financials. You get to meet the chairman of the board and the president and CEO. Now, this whole approach, this playfulness, is a complete surprise to most people. It had all the information in the back that you're looking for, but this got the company lots and lots of free media attention and therefore boosted their sales. The hero of this movement, this idea that humor is good for your bottom line, is from, well, here, let me go back one step here. I mentioned banking, and let me give you an example from the world of banking. There's a company called bankrate.com, and you look them up online, and they'll tell you what the current mortgage rates are. Now, that's not very interesting, but here's what they did in an ad in Newsweek magazine. If you can read this here, it says, less than 2% of condoms actually fail. Every percent counts. And if you look at... Now, If you're advertising for a company that tells you current mortgage rates, that's pretty hard to get people to remember you. But this, I think, is just wonderful. To get the guy's look, that look on his face, I'm sure that took a while. Even the IRS, we're only 2 weeks away from April 15th, even the IRS has tried to be more playful and funny. This is their interactive zine on the web called Tax E. Get it? Well, there's a learning curve to humor, and the IRS is right at the beginning of the learning curve. Now, the hero of this movement, that humor helps you do business better, is very famous in Dallas, and in fact, famous in the United States, and that's Herb Kelleher of Southwest Airlines. Here is a special issue of Fortune magazine, which is not a funny magazine. Is Herb Kelleher America's best CEO? He's wild, he's crazy, he's in a tough business, and he's built the most successful airline in the United States. In the article, Herb Kelleher explains how at Southwest, humor is essential to being hired. One of the questions that they ask you in the interview, whether you're a pilot or a maintenance person, is, can you remember a time at work where you were really stuck, but you wriggled out of it with your sense of humor? If you don't have a story at that point in the interview is not successful. A whole book, in fact, a couple of books have been written about Herb Kelleher. My favorite is called Nuts, Southwest Airlines' Crazy Recipe for Business and Personal Success. And in the book, Kelleher shows a lot of creative thinking, support of his people, and sense of humor all rolled into one. Let me give you an example from right here in Dallas in 1992. Kelleher had just come out with a new advertising slogan for Southwest Airlines. It was called Plain Smart, P-L-A-N-E, smart. Another company called him in a matter of days and said, we're an airline too, and we use that motto, and we've been using it for over a year. Now, in the world of American business, what's the standard way to solve a problem like that, a business problem? Pardon? Yes. Contact somebody right away, probably get into a lawyer. It's probably going to take you years and lots of money. What Kelleher said to the head of the other airline is, well, we don't have the time or the money, so I hereby challenge you to an arm wrestling match in the Dallas Sportatorium. It was an old wrestling house. And the best 2 out of 3 gets to keep the slogan. Kelleher at this time was already in his late 60s. Here's Kelleher. He's a chain smoker, and he also drinks a lot of Wild Turkey bourbon. Here is his manager up here. Across his chest, he has a bandiero, like in those Mexican movies, only instead of bullets in those little compartments, he has airline-sized bottles of Wild Turkey bourbon. The wrestling match went pretty much as people expected. Kurt, the guy from the other airline, was in his 30s. He had been a weightlifter and a football player, had never smoked, was in terrific shape. Now, if you ask who whumped whose arm 2 out of 3 times, well, Kurt did. But Herb Kelleher was joking and kidding and doing all this comic shtick through the whole time. And at the end of it, the other guy was laughing so hard, he said, oh, you keep the slogan too. Now, this is not traditional business. This isn't how traditional leaders work. This is a new kind of leadership. It's a kind of leadership that is as much about play as it is about work. And when I talk about humor works, I mean humor and play are both forms of getting things done. And so Kelleher is kind of the model for my whole movement here. Now, the preface to the book, Nuts for Herb Kelleher, comes from this gentleman, and his name, he's Tom Peters, and his books have sold in the millions, and he now commands over $100,000 for a 2-hour presentation. He's kind of my personal deity. Here's what Tom Peters says. Welcome to a world where imagination is the source of value in the economy. It's an insane world, and in an insane world, sane organizations make no sense. Now, he doesn't mean this literally. He doesn't mean you should be insane. But what he means is you've got to think outside the box. You've got to think in creative ways. The new CEO of Southwest Airlines, who took over when Herb Kelleher stepped down a couple years ago, is Gary Kelly. Here's a story from the New York Times called Southwest, Way Southwest. And here's Gary Kelly dressed as Edna Turnblatt from Hairspray. The role, well, I'll tell the rest of the story later. So this is the kind of leadership that American business is starting to see. Now, I want to talk about the benefits of humor, but first I want to talk about what humor is, the nature of humor. And I want to use a theory from psychology that has a difficult name, but it's an easy idea. It's called the incongruity theory. And what the incongruity theory says is humor is the enjoyment of incongruity. What does that word mean? Something is incongruous if it doesn't fit your expectations, if it surprises you, if it violates your picture of the world and how things are supposed to happen. So, if something is ordinary or normal, the opposite of that is incongruous. Here's a simple example. We had a bad fire in our house last July, and for 5 months we had to live in various places, mostly in an apartment, and I had to go to a laundromat a lot. The first laundromat I went to, as I was putting the socks and the underwear into a washer, I noticed that there was a sign on the wall. Now, whoever wrote that sign obviously had a simple idea in mind. When you're done with the clothes washer, take your stuff out so other people can use the machine. But I thought of a second meaning. I pictured the buzzer going off and everyone stripping. That incongruous idea, if you enjoy it, notice you have to enjoy the incongruity, is what humor is all about. Second example. My family and I, before we moved to Virginia, lived in Tampa, Florida for 6 years. The day we moved in, a house was for sale down the street. And the day we moved out, the same house was for sale with the same sign. See if you can see any problems with the marketing. Now, from Bill's point of view, the name Oder is a perfectly ordinary name because it's his name. But if you put together Oder with Tampa, Florida in the summertime, it's not a good real estate sales name. Okay. Here's a law office in Williamsburg, Virginia, not far from where I teach. Now, if my name were Crook, I think I would change it if I were in the law business. I've got a filing cabinet. I've got 2 filing cabinet drawers full of odd names. These are some of my favorites. These people just weren't quite thinking when they made up these signs. Anybody know what that is? Guess what kind of company is it? Clothes, right? They sell clothes. They don't sell real babies and children. Here's another one. My family and I we went on a fishing trip a couple years ago, and there was a little place. It was a restaurant. It was the post office. It's the bait shop. It was the everything place. But they didn't think very carefully when they made this sign for their awning. And here's the worst one of all. This one comes from Tacoma, Washington. I was out there doing some stuff near Microsoft. And Taco Bell was having a terrible time hiring people at minimum wage to work their stands. And one branch of Taco Bell was getting no applicants at all to work the counters until somebody went out and reread the sign, and it was a simple spelling mistake. Spelling is important, right? Okay. So humor is being hit by something like this, something that violates your expectations, and enjoying it. Notice that you don't always enjoy incongruity. Sometimes when you're surprised, sometimes when your expectations are violated, you don't go into a laughter mode, but instead you go into a fear or anger mode. Fear and anger are the basic components of stress. Now, what makes the difference between the person who laughs about something and the person who is frightened by it or stressed out by it? One feature that I point to, I call mental distance. And what I mean by mental distance is when something awful happens or something surprising happens, if you can step back from it, if you're less emotionally engaged, if you can see it from a higher perspective, often you can find it funny. Even though a person who is too emotionally close to it would not find it. And here's a simple example. I've got a wonderful son named Jordan, who's now a graduate student, but when he was in 3rd grade, Jordan came down with pneumonia right before the Christmas break in December. His teacher very nicely had all of his little classmates send him a get well card. In the first couple of cards Jordan got, he was starting to cheer up. But then he got to this card from Allison McAndrew, which really bothered him. I hope you can read it. Allison's writing is not the best. Dear Jordan, I don't want you to know this, but pneumonia can kill you. So get well soon. The next line, my wife and I read, your friend Allison McAndrew, but Jordan sounded out the words, You're fried. And the graphics here I thought were very cheerful. Allison, by the way, is now an artist. I thought these graphics were cheerful, but Jordan was crying. He said, Dad, that flower's died. I said, is that horse in a cemetery or what? Then he went back and he reread that first line, which is pure third grade. And he put his head in his hand and he said, Dad, if she didn't want me to know, why did she tell me? So Jordan is weeping. For him, this is the end of the line. He's cashing in his little chips and checking out. My wife was laughing so hard she had to leave the room. I was biting the insides of my cheeks to keep from laughing. Why is it funny to us, but it's not funny to him? Well, mental distance. We can step back. We can say, 3 weeks from now, when you're sitting under the Christmas tree opening your presents, this is ancient history. But he could only see it from the here, now, me perspective. And this is the stress perspective. If you don't have stress in your life, or you don't have enough, you want more, just get up every morning and say, here, now, me. Think only of this place, and this time, and only of myself. And everything that's surprising will look like a threat. We could step back and we could see things from a higher perspective. Now, when I do courses on humor, I'll take a couple of weeks to talk about kinds of mental distance. But I'm trying to give you everything in 1 hour. Distance in space is one kind. A lot of times when you read about something or you see it on YouTube that happened in Tokyo or in Paris or far away, it's funny. But if it were happening closer to home, it wouldn't be so funny. Distance in time is another wonderful way to make something funny that isn't inherently funny. A lot of things that you laugh about when you get together with your oldest friends, maybe from high school or something, weren't funny when they happened, but now that they're safely in the past, now they can be funny. Steve Allen put it this way. He said, tragedy plus time equals comedy. Third kind of distance I call personal distance. And this is just the difference between you and me. If we're having lunch and you spill a blob of ketchup on your shirt and it looks like a bullet hole, well, that's funny. But if it were my shirt, $50, all cotton, right? And I know I can't get the stain out, well, so the difference between you and me is I have to clean up my mess. You don't have to clean up my mess. So you can laugh at me and I can laugh at you. Mel Brooks put it this way. Mel Brooks said, tragedy is me cutting my finger. Comedy is you falling down a manhole and dying. Well, that's Mel Brooks. Okay. So these kinds of mental distance allow something that isn't inherently funny to become funny. Let me give you a simple example. We've got some friends from Tampa who recently sent us this picture that happened in their neighborhood, Temple Terrace, Florida. Now, I find this pretty funny because we used to live right down the street from these folks. But some of you can't even find it funny because you're so sympathetic with it. Notice that in order to laugh at this, you have to kind of make it into a cartoon. You have to almost fictionalize it. If this alligator were really at my door, I wouldn't find it funny. Maybe a better way to get mental distance is by fictionalizing things. Let me give the example. I'm friends with Bob Mankoff, who's the cartoon editor of The New Yorker, and he lets me use these cartoons for free, so I take advantage of it. Here's a wonderful cartoon about cubicles. Everybody has complained that cubicles don't give you much privacy, they compromise your dignity, it's hard to pay attention when other people are talking or eating. Tom Chaney at The New Yorker came up with this cartoon about cubicles. Now, if this were a real event, if you really worked in a cubicle and one day you said, what's that funny smell? And you looked up and you saw a corpse, that wouldn't be funny. But because it's only in a cartoon, it can be funny. Now, let me test your sense of humor, especially your sense of mental distance, with an item from the newspaper. This happened in 1989, so this was over 20 years ago. Secondly, it happened far away, Seattle, Washington. Thirdly, it's got personal distance. It didn't happen to you. So it's got distance of time, distance of space, and personal distance. Courthouse toilets explode when lines get crossed. Seattle. About 24 toilets and urinals in the King County Courthouse exploded when they were flushed Thursday because an air compressor had been erroneously connected to a water line. We think we lost about 20 to 25 toilets, said building manager Bill Kemp. No injuries were reported, although several people apparently were soaked. Now, you're not sadists. You're not mean people who twist wings off flies for fun. You have a normal dose of compassion and love for your fellow human being. How can you find this funny? Well, very simply, it happened 21 years ago. Even if you wanted to help, suppose you want to take up a collection, dry cleaning aid, where would you send the check? It's all safely in the past. Secondly, it happened over 1,000 miles away in Seattle. And thirdly, you don't know anybody. So it's not like your brother or your sister or some friend was involved in this. My guess is that at the moment of explosion, not even a professional comedian sitting in one of the stalls would find this funny, because it'd be threatening. It's too close to home. But my guess is within a couple of minutes, the people with a good sense of humor would laugh about this. And within a couple of weeks, even people who were kind of curmudgeonly would find this funny. So events by themselves are not funny, but events by themselves are also not stressful. It depends on how involved you are. And the farther back you can step, the easier it is to find things funny. My secretary at William & Mary has a wonderful collection of Post-it notes. I think this is my favorite Post-it note. Have you ever seen this one? Every morning when you get up, you don't have a good day ahead of you. You also don't have a bad day ahead of you. What you have ahead of you is a day. If everything that happens is close up in your face, then you're going to have a lot of bad days. If you can step back, if you can see things a bit more like a cartoon from a bit of distance, all kinds of things can become more funny. Abraham Lincoln, most famously, said, most folks are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. And I love that as advice. Now, the benefits of humor, of this stepping back, of seeing things from a less engaged perspective, are many, and my time is short. So I'm going to condense into about 30 minutes the benefits of humor. And the first one is the medical benefits. This stuff has wonderful research, and if you're in the medical sciences field, I hope you'll at least check out some of this stuff. I call this laugh for the health of it. First of all, laughter gives a workout to your heart and lungs. When you're laughing really hard, you take in 6 times more oxygen than when you're simply, say, having a conversation. Secondly, there's pain reduction. In one experiment they line up a bunch of medical students, and they've got these big stainless steel soup kettles full of ice water with little chunks of ice. And they say, put your arm in the ice water up to your elbow and hold it in that cold water as long as you can stand the pain. They're medical students. They'll do whatever you tell them, so they all do it. The students who joke about this, who kid about this, who say, will this be on the final and all that stuff, they're able to keep their arms in the ice water almost twice as long. The students who are serious about this, why are we doing this? Ooh, this really hurts. They have to pull their arms out sooner. Next is relaxation. While you're laughing, your muscle tension goes up, your heart rate goes up, and your blood pressure goes up. But when you stop laughing, there's a drop in all 3 of those, blood pressure, heart rate, and muscle tension, below normal, and those things stay below normal for up to 45 minutes. This is the research of Dr. Bill Fry of Stanford University, one of the pioneers in this field. The next item is the immune system boost. These studies have been done by Lee Burke and others, and they show that people who laugh a lot get a boost in the number of immune system agents in their blood, and also the activity of those immune system agents. So that people who laugh a lot, to put it really simply, get fewer colds. In your mouth, for example, and throat, there's something called immunoglobulin G. And people who laugh a lot get higher levels of this. People who are stressed out all the time have lower levels. So they have a harder time fighting off infections. All right, so next one, I'll skip laxative benefits. It's too close to lunch. Stress reduction. I do want to talk about stress reduction in a minute. But first, let me show you the cover of the Journal of the American Medical Association. This is the most prestigious journal in medicine. And this was done several years back. This is the section for medical students. The guy in the middle is the editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association. And the issue is called Medicine, the Best Laughter. This was drawn by Mort Drucker. Anybody know Mort Drucker for 30 or 40 years did a lot of cartoons in what magazine for high school boys? Mad Magazine. Thank you, sir. Okay. There are a number of publications now in the medical field. Here's one for nurses. This is one of I love doing talks for nurses. This is called the Journal of Nursing Jocularity. This is a special issue called Bathing Patients Options. And here's, okay. with the attention to the immune system, stress reduction, pain reduction, relaxation, all this other stuff. There's now a lot of serious study about how laughter is physically good for you. When I do talks at hospitals, I always talk to nurses, and I say, do you have examples of things that doctors wrote down on patients' charts too quickly without thinking or editing, and they turned out a little strange? And I always get at least one example. These I've collected over my 20 years doing talks at medical schools and hospitals. These are from patients' charts doctors had written. On the second day, her knee was better, and on the third day, it disappeared completely. The patient has been depressed ever since she began seeing me in 1996. Patient has 2 teenage children, but no other abnormalities. The patient refused an autopsy. I can't picture how that one got written down. She stated she had been constipated for most of her adult life until she got a divorce. Discharge status, alive but without permission. I think that's my all-time favorite. Okay, I mentioned stress, and stress is now at epidemic proportions in this country. At the checkout counter of the supermarket a couple years ago, I picked up one of those little books for 89 cents, Beat Stress, and this woman's head almost says it all. Doesn't this look like Cape Canaveral? And if she just pulled her 2 hands back, that her head would launch into space. Here's a more serious book called How to Avoid Stress. Look at that wonderful tear line for art students across stress. How to avoid stress before it kills you. Stress is now estimated to cost American employers over $200 billion a year in accidents, lost time, company medical benefits, etc. The costs of stress, as I say, are high. Stress is estimated to prompt 2/3 of visits to physicians, office visits. It's a major contributor to the 6 leading causes of death in the United States, the 2 top ones being heart disease and cancer. The damage of stress comes in many forms: headaches, high blood pressure, impaired memory, strokes, heart attacks, ulcers, and as I said before, weakened immune system. When you are laughing, your immune system goes up. When you're stressed out, your immune system is suppressed. The basics of stress, and this is a very simplistic presentation, but it's basically right. Stress is a fight or flight reaction. When you feel stressed out, you're reacting in your brain and in your body as if there were, say, a wild animal or an enemy with a spear about to confront you. And stress is ancient. It goes back before human beings. There are 2 emotions that kick in stress. The first is fear, and the other one is anger. And both of these, at an early stage of human life on Earth, were adaptive. If you're scared, for example, you're more attentive. You see what's out there. You're stronger when you're scared. You can run away faster. So fear prepares us to run away. Anger prepares us to fight. In anger, there's a hormone called norepinephrine. There's a release of blood sugar. Blood is redistributed to the head. All kinds of things happen when you're angry, as when you're scared, that enable you to run away or confront an enemy. Now, these emotions have lasted in human evolution, but in modern life, these 2 emotions aren't usually very productive. When was the last time at school or at home or at work where running out of the building would be the perfect solution to the problem? Or smashing him in the face would be the perfect, right? Anger and fear we've inherited from our distant ancestors, but they aren't so valuable anymore. Now, humor is interesting because the events that happen in your body when you laugh are the exact opposite of what happens in your body when you're scared or you're angry. Laughter reduces stress chemicals in the blood. Stress suppresses the immune system, but laughter boosts the immune system. In stress, we feel passive. We feel like they're doing it to us. But when we joke about something, we feel like we've done something about it. Sigmund Freud, the guy who invented psychiatry, wrote a whole book about laughter. And in it, he said, when we make a joke about something, we feel as if we've accomplished something, even if we haven't. So in our bodies, we can relax. So stress has this wonderful, not stress, but humor has this wonderful ability to overcome stress. Let me give you a simple example. We've moved around a lot because my wife is also a professor, and finding 2 jobs in the same city is difficult. Before we moved to Florida, we lived in upstate New York. This winter was pretty raunchy in upstate New York. I understand from Drew that it snowed a couple of times here in Dallas. So you can imagine what it was like farther to the north. We lived not far from Syracuse, New York, in the early 90s, and there they had an unusual event. At the end of the snow season, that is in March, when everybody was just sick and tired of all the snow, the City Council of Syracuse, New York decided to pass a new law. It's official. No more snow shall fall in the city of Syracuse until Christmas Eve. The Common Council agreed to that last night. The resolution says, while the city has distinguished itself with a record snowfall of 162 inches, its residents have had enough snow and are now ready for spring. And then they resolved that snow would be illegal until December 24th, 1992, of course, Christmas Eve for a white Christmas. Now, as Sigmund Freud would analyze this, by joking about this, they reduced their stress. They also brought themselves together. If I'm suffering from cabin fever, because I've got snow piled up outside my front door, and you're suffering from cabin fever, and she is, and he is, and she is, but we're not together, then our stress is bad. If we talk about it, if we joke about how hard it was to get our car out and how it slid down the driveway, as soon as you share something and you make it funny, the worst thing in the world can become a source of enjoyment. I did a presentation when I lived in Tampa to a group of Holocaust survivors, over 100 people who had been in Dachau, in Auschwitz, in Bergen-Belsen, in Treblinka, in the Nazi death camps. And they told stories of humor in the Nazi death camps. So if humor can allow people to survive in extreme circumstances, in the daily ups and downs of life, it obviously has some value. Okay, close with a little short saying from a guy named Ashley Brilliant. If you can neither accept it nor change it, try to laugh at it. The second benefit of humor, I call humor as mental flexibility. Humor helps us see things from new perspectives. In fact, if you think of what a joke does, a joke leads your mind along path one, and then at the punchline, makes you reinterpret it and go off onto path two. Here's an ancient joke. Mae West in the mid-1930s said, marriage is a great institution, but I'm not ready for an institution. Notice what she does. Marriage is a great social custom, but I'm not ready for a mental asylum. Notice also when you explain a joke, you wreck it. But that's what I had to do to explain. Okay, so the typical joke in lots of humor makes you think one way, and then you got to think another way real fast. That makes you mentally flexible. Okay, so let me just try a couple examples here of mental flexibility. What's that? Duck? Rabbit, duck, rabbit, bird. Sometimes people see scissors or the okay sign. Notice that I asked it as if it were a multiple choice question, but there's all kinds of answers. Here's another one. Someone sent me this recently. Here's a duck rabbit that the rabbit is running really fast to the right. If you want to see the duck, you have to put your head down on your right shoulder. I'd tip the projector if I could, but I can't. So can everybody see the duck? It's kind of a Harpo Marx duck with one leg up in the air. Is there anyone who can't see the duck? Good. Your head on your right shoulder and you'll see the duck. Okay. Now, notice here, this is like a joke. You see things one way and then you have to see things another way. Authoritarian personalities, people who are into their own power and emphasize their own positions, typically do not like this kind of humor or this mental flexibility. The first time I did this, I used this one, and I had a group of people, all male, this is important, seated around a table. And I said, what's this? The head honcho said, it's a duck. An underling across the table who didn't make as much money as the first guy said, it looks like a rabbit. The first guy said, no, it's a duck. And the other one said, yes, sir, it's a duck. So if you are an authority person, you want people to see things your way. People who are egalitarian, who can delegate, who can share authority, like the fact that you can see things from several points of view. So humor's got this wonderful ability to switch us. Here's another one. Since we're near Love Field and DFW, which way is this plane flying? Is it flying toward you or away from you? The answer is yes. If you're on the ground looking up at it, it's flying away from you. If you're above it, I hope in another airplane, it's coming toward you. So the answer is yes. This ability of humor to switch between interpretations works with words as well as with visual. Can somebody read this for me? Read these words? This actually needs some punctuation, but without punctuation, there's two ways to read this. Can anybody read this one way? Just pick a way and read it. Yes, ma'am. Nice and loud. Oh, go. Beautiful. Did everyone hear her? She paused so well. She said, woman, full stop. Without her, man is nothing. Now, there's another way to read this. This could be a good country and western song. What's the other way to read this? He's got it. Woman without her man is nothing. Right? So these are opposite ways. And the humor here is switching back and forth between them. Okay, people who are in the business of creative thinking, people who do brainstorming, for example, in the world of business for things like invention, suggest some rules. One, go for quantity, not quality. When you're trying to think up great ideas, don't try to think up the great ideas at the beginning. Just think up all the ideas you can in the field, and then go back and edit later. Second, don't criticize any idea. So don't stomp on anybody's goofy ideas. Third, wild ideas are okay. Wild ideas get you thinking more creatively, so you should encourage it. In some brainstorming techniques, they put a joker in the group to be intentionally wild. Lastly, combining and improving ideas are okay. Now, these are almost exactly the same as rules for writing comedy. So comedy and humor are very close to creative thinking in general. If you look at successful American business, more successful products have been invented in the United States than in any other country. And I think that's because Americans tend to have more of a sense of humor. Scotchgard, for example, a Teflon, the microwave oven, Velcro. Velcro was invented by a Swiss mountain climber. And he'd come home at the end of the day, and he'd have these burrs that were sticking to his socks. And he'd pull them off, and he'd go, these things are such a pain. Until one day he realized, these things make cloth stick to cloth. And a couple steps later, he had Velcro. Post-it notes were invented by a guy who worked for 3M Corporation. This is now $3 billion a year for the company. And he was working with an adhesive that was lousy. It came right off. Something would stick, but as soon as you peeled it. Now, if you were thinking narrowly, you'd say, what a terrible adhesive. Let's scratch this hole. But he said, sometimes you want a weak adhesive. Hence the birth of Post-it notes. It's too close to lunch to talk about kitty litter, so I'll just skip the rest of this list. The last benefit of humor I call humor as social lubricant. It sounds sleazy, but I don't mean it that way. What I mean is, if I can deal with you with a sense of humor, if both of us can laugh together, we create rapport almost instantly. You know this from dating. Right? Some of you haven't dated in a while, but if you can remember trying to be funny with a person of the opposite sex or the same sex, whatever your preference, and the other person didn't get your humor, or they got it but they didn't like it, like they found it hostile, forget that relationship. If, on the other hand, you tried humor and the other person really laughed genuinely, you're in good shape. It took me a long time, 37 years before I met my wife, but as soon as she laughed, I knew this is golden. And we've been together for over 2 decades. Okay, so humor's got this ability to create good morale. Secondly, it allows you to criticize another person without threatening the other person. Thirdly, it diffuses conflicts, all kinds of situations where you can get the two parties to come together and laugh about something. Humor can help reduce conflict. Lastly, and I'll say something about this in a minute, women's humor and men's humor. Let me give you a couple examples. This is from a store that had a lot of very fragile glass items. If you have kids, this is in a tourist area. If you have kids coming into the store, they could easily take out $500 of inventory just by doing that. So you have to tell the parents, watch your kids. But just telling them, watch your kids, that's threatening. So here's what they did. This is a little sign. As soon as people see this and laugh, they know what the issue is. Take care of your kids because we don't want you breaking the glass stuff. A second example. This is from the world of debt collection. I've done several presentations for credit managers and people who have to collect money. The standard way to collect a debt is to threaten people. But that is not, even if it works, is not very friendly. If I get a letter saying if I don't send money within 14 days, a lawyer's going to come after me. Even if I pay up, I'm going to feel, geez, they were bullying. They were hostile to me. So here's a different strategy. Here's a debt collection letter. Here's a middle paragraph. We appreciate your business, but please give us a break. Your account is overdue 10 months. That means we've carried you longer than your mother did. Now, there the strategy is completely different. You get them to laugh, and as they laugh about it, they go, yeah, it has been 10 months, and they pay up. One of the sessions I did years ago, one woman in the group was way ahead of me. She said she went to the local stationery store, and she had a little rubber stamp made up. It cost her $10. And when an account is overdue and she's sending the third invoice or the fourth invoice, she simply stamps this on the account. Hello there, I'm the company computer. So far only I know that you haven't been making regular payments on your account. However, if I don't process a payment from you within 10 days, I will have to tell a human. She estimates this has saved the company something like $75,000, and this is a small company. She said people not only pay up quickly, but they pay up with a chuckle. So if you can get somebody to realize their mistake or their error or their deficiency and laugh at the same time, in the world of business, that's absolutely golden. In the world of education and training, this is also very valuable. The most successful guy in the world of training to use this is John Cleese, formerly of the Monty Python group. In 1973, when Monty Python was just getting rolling, Cleese started his own company called Video Arts. It's the world's leading producer of training films, and just about all of them are comedies. And they usually show you what not to do. But it's so funny that you learn, wow, that's a serious mistake. Driving schools, there are a number of these in Texas right now. Larger cities in Texas now have these. Here's one, I believe this one is in California, called Great Comedians Traffic School. This traffic school, for years, was hiring guys who were stand-up comics at night, but during the day they didn't have anything to do. So they figured, let's try these guys to teach driving, especially to teach courses in remedial driving to people who've been convicted of DUI and stuff like that. The students loved the teachers so much because they were funny that now the Great Comedians Traffic School has nobody but comedians. You can't take a course from a serious instructor at this school. So all kinds of ways in which humor can help. If you use humor in teaching or in a presentation, let me just give you a couple of the ground rules. I'm putting together a whole bunch of segments that I do. This is one that I do for business executives, so some of this won't apply if you're just a student, but here's some basic principles. First, if you're going to be funny, don't tell them that you're going to be funny. Don't say, have you heard the joke about, or I heard this really funny story. As soon as you announce it, you've already prepared them to not be surprised. You want to surprise them, so don't say I'm going to be funny, just be funny. There's another advantage to that is if you're not funny, nobody will even notice that you failed because they didn't know you were trying. Second, connect the humor with the topic. If you're doing a talk, for example, about nuclear disarmament, don't stick a joke on the front about a minister, a rabbi, and a priest in a rowboat. Stick a joke, if you're going to use a joke at all, I don't recommend jokes, but if you're going to use anything, make it fit with the topic. Then when they remember the humor, they'll remember the topic. Third, keep everything short. We all know people, in fact, you might be married to one or have one as a relative, who hears a joke that's 17 words long, but when they tell it, it's about 80 words long. And my father, Lord rest his soul, he always stretched out a joke until it was painful. Brevity is the soul of wit, said Shakespeare. Lastly, use true stories rather than jokes. It's so much easier to get a laugh from a true story. A joke, every word counts, and often you put them in the wrong order and you get them screwed up. So these are some values. Next principle, tell stories from your own experience. Everybody's going to be more interested in something that happened to you than they are going to be interested in something happened to this woman in New York. So the closer and the more authentic the thing is tied to you, the better. Avoid humor that emphasizes your position or power. This is a principle in business. A lot of business humor is based on ranking. That's not a good idea. People don't appreciate being put down. Lastly, avoid ridicule. If you want humor that has a target, use numero uno. Use yourself. And people will love you for it. When you make a joke about yourself, people are more likely to like you rather than less likely to like you. Okay, let me say a word about men's humor and women's humor, and then I've got a couple pictures, and then we'll have some discussion. When I started in this business, I just thought of humor as kind of a thing that's human. But then I started paying attention to the way my female friends and the way my male friends use humor. And then I read a wonderful book by a woman who's now a really good friend of mine. Her name is Regina Barreca, Barreca, and she teaches at University of Connecticut. She's got a terrific book. They used to call me Snow White, but I drifted. Women's strategic use of humor. And Regina and I over the years have talked a lot, and here's the scheme. Men often use humor in a competitive way. So it's like football or war or some other competition. So I'm trying to score points on you, you're trying to score points on me. Women very seldom do that. Women's humor is usually, it's a sharing experience. It's a cooperative experience. Even if a woman is laughing about something that another woman did that was stupid, it's not to put her down or score points on her. It's to put an arm around her shoulder and say, it's happened to all of us. This shows in practical jokes. A lot of men's humor, and today is the day for practical jokes, causes inconvenience, even suffering to the other person. Women almost never engage in practical jokes because they're too sympathetic with the potential target. When we lived in Florida, the local power company had a story that appeared in the newspaper. Two guys were digging a trench for the local power company. And one guy, standing next to his friend, found a vine that looked like a snake. Well, there are 4 poisonous snakes in Florida. Guy found that thing and he said, this will be funny. So he threw the vine up in the air so it would come down on his friend. And as it was coming down on his friend, he yelled, snake! The other guy died of a heart attack. Now, women don't do that. Thirdly is sarcasm versus kidding. If I'm sarcastic about something silly or some mistake that you made, I'm not just pointing out your mistake. I'm trying to make you feel bad about it. I'm trying to make you feel stupid. Sarkazo comes from the Greek verb sarkazo, which means to tear with the teeth. So it's what a wolf does to the hind end of a deer when it takes it down. What's kidding? Kidding is very often based on the same thing. If I'm kidding you about some silly thing that you did, I'm also pointing out some shortcoming, but I'm not doing it in a negative way. As I say, when I'm kidding you, it's as if I'm putting my arm around your shoulder. So if you react to kidding in a negative way, if you say, stop mocking me, I say, I'm not mocking you, we're only kidding. So women tend to engage in more kidding. Now these lines I've drawn in a very black and white format. And not all men have this kind of humor, and not all women have that kind of humor. And in the last 20 years, there's been a lot more melding of the two. Women have more aggressive humor, and men have more sensitive humor. But it's a useful way to think. Fictional jokes. If you go back, I was just watching some comedians from the Ed Sullivan Show in the 1960s, and it was amazing. Virtually every comedian on the Ed Sullivan Show told jokes. This guy walked into a bar, and he ordered Today, no comedian in the world tells jokes. At least no successful comedian tells jokes. Fictional jokes, in fact, it was said, was what women can't do. Women can't tell jokes. As I checked into this, it turns out to be true. Women don't remember jokes because they don't care about jokes. Who cares about a priest, a minister, and a rabbi in a rowboat? It didn't really happen. It's got nothing to do with your life or my life. So why would I even remember something like that? So men were traditionally more drawn to fictional jokes. Now, as I say, this has changed in the last 20 years. Women tend to tell true stories. Women tend to tell stories about somebody that they care about and something silly that happened to them. The last distinction comes from Regina Barreca, and that's that men like the Three Stooges and women hate the Three Stooges. I think that's so beautiful. Okay, I just want to close with something really quick. In any stressful situation, whether it's at school, at work, at home, when you are faced with a situation that seems threatening, if you can step back from it, if you can see it from a bit higher perspective, to be more playful, to have more of a sense of humor, your life can go a lot more smoothly. Now, I'm not recommending humor as a cop-out. I'm not recommending laughing off your responsibilities. But I'm saying when you've done what you could do about a situation, then it's a very good thing if you can be playful and laugh. And let me give you the ultimate in stressful situations, and that's our armed services in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a collection put together by Tom Phillips, and these are people in the armed services in Iraq and Afghanistan. Can everybody see the purse? Okay. This is at Christmas time, obviously. Guy mooning the enemy. Warning U.S. Marines, do not feed, avoid eye contact, do not provoke, no prolonged stopping, no flash photographies, no French reporters. Here is a bomber, and here's a bomb, and a toilet. Here is a, a trap using a Heineken beer bottle as the bait. And lastly, this one. Okay. Let me wrap it up. Humor is experiencing something or thinking of something that you weren't ready for, something that doesn't fit your expectations. But somehow you're able to step back from it. You're not as engaged as you normally would be, and you can enjoy the incongruity. That ability is unique to human beings. You can surprise your cat, for example. Dress up in a funny costume in front of your cat. Your cat can be surprised, but your cat will not react with amusement. Probably not fear or anger either. Your cat will just go in the other room. Humans have this ability because they can get out of the here and the now and the me. I can think about me and here and now, but I can also think about past and future, and I can think about other places and times, and I can think about what the world looks like from your point of view or her point of view, and not just my point of view. It's because we are what Aristotle called rational animals that we can have our sense of humor. And we're the only species that has got this. The next time you face potentially stressful events at work, at school, at home, ask yourself a simple question. What's this going to look like in a week? Suppose it's still going to look bad. Well, what's it going to look like in a year? You've all got stuff from last year. Or maybe, what's it going to look like in 5 years? You've all got stuff from some time in the past that was awful, but now it's funny. The secret to a good sense of humor is to shorten the time you have to wait to laugh. You've all said to yourselves, someday we'll laugh about this. Well, my question is, why wait?